Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-Federalists, yes they did. They absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty does work for you. And this is Tom Navulis, your host, and I am so delighted that you're back with me again this week. We have a lot to cover. There's so much that's been going on. I mean, I can sit here and look at my phone or look at the internet and see all the gazillion things that we have been encountering again, not just in this election cycle, maybe in our lifetime, but what it really comes down to is, what do we understand and how do we look at the truth of what matters? And boy, it was real interesting in a text message between a couple of FBI people talking about the matters doesn't matter, or it matters doesn't matter. And so, I don't know if that's some kind of term in physics, or if it's a term in philosophy, or if it's just the way that we're getting modernized in our form of language, is what is matter and what does matter. Well, I could talk from the position of chemistry and physics and all of that, but that's not really what we're concerned about, is it? What we're concerned about is a value. We're concerned about those value propositions and what is it that is relationally important in our time, in our life cycle, in our generation, and for the generations yet to come. And what have the past generations given us? So those are some of the things that I want to talk about today as I go back and delve back into the Federalist Papers. We're going to do that, but before I get into that which Madison talked about, because I'm going to focus again on Madison in Federalist numbers 38 and 39, what I want to make very, very clear, especially for, and I know none of my pastors will ever watch or listen to this program, but I want to make it very clear for pastors, and especially those that I know and interact with, is that I never, ever, ever have, nor I ever, ever, ever will believe or think that America is super special in God's design relative to the rest of the world, and we're some super special thing. No, every nation is a sinful nation. Every nation and every people type and every person has a real problem with an understanding of what their relationship is with the living God. So with that, what I am very clear on, and what I want to make very specific, is that I take and absolutely follow through the biblical readings and studies that which the reformers were very, very clear on and is applicable in America, is that, we have a cultural mandate as much as we have a mandate to bring the Word of God to individuals and to the nations. So what that means for me, and I have to make this clear because it's come up in some conversations and that, but I want to make it clear to everyone that ever will or has listened to this program or watched it on YouTube, is that, we're supposed to take and live to the fullest extent of what we believe from that biblical perspective for the liberties upon which Christ is giving us. And that in a nation or in a country that allows for the structure of liberty, as does our constitutional republic, and we're going to talk about that with Madison, because he's very clear on this as well, and is that we are to participate in our government as that citizen from that moral perspective, to the extent that we are to defeat evil and not allow evil to become predominant even in government. Hey, that gets you right into the book of Romans, and where everybody starts quoting all of that about bowing, that we're supposed to be submissive to government. Well, that also means is that the leaders are supposed to be submissive to the sovereign God for good government. And that's what it's about. What is it, good government, and what does it take to have that? And it takes each individual to be able to take and bow down before the living Christ, the King of Kings, the whole Savior of everything, and know that he is sovereign first. So by that, we govern well. And we do not allow evil to prosper in America because we have a constitutional construct, a covenant between the people and governance such that we are to stop evil and protect those things which are guaranteed for us in natural law, or what I even call it is the simplicity of general grace. Okay? So with all of that said, not being the theological type that some think they are, or some absolutely are, I'll kind of leave it in that regard. So as I look this week, and as I look on my phone even today, and we're thinking about this whole thing on amnesty, illegals taking, and this frauds me, ladies and gentlemen. So this angers me when we talk about evil and actions and perpetrating against what we have as a solid form of governance, when we have those people who are illegal and taking and being given an unconstitutional, DACA is absolutely unconstitutional, and those that are in the courts fighting that just go to prove they're anti-American from Madison and even Hamilton's perspective of what that means, okay? So what I'm saying here is that when you have people storming the Capitol building, storming the offices of duly elected representatives, and they're allowed to get away with their actions, their violent action, if you will, their voicing of, yes, free speech, but you know something? If you're an illegal, it's so hard, and this is where it gets so convoluted into what rights somebody has. See, when you're determined to be a criminal, your rights are very, very limited. If you're a citizen that becomes a criminal, you have certain rights of due process by virtue of your constitutional protections. But if you are someone that is illegal, now it comes to the balanced, the rational laws of nations. If you go back to the laws of nations and read the laws of nations from the 1700s, illegals have no rights in a sovereign nation. Now, under all the UN insanity, and that is what takes and puts the handcuffs, if you will, upon our legislators, upon our judges, and so on, is that what you have is that under the United Nations laws of nations, we're supposed to give in and capitulate to these illegals because they are transient persons, and all of these other United Nations terminologies that then colors by virtue of either treaty or by virtue of executive international agreements, colors how we then interact and act with or upon these type of people, or tolerate that which they're doing, which is total violation of law, and how it becomes acceptable. So these are very, very interesting times, very, very interesting components of what does it mean to be a lawful nation, a nation of laws. And I heard last night, went to an event at a Liberty Coalition meeting that had a law professor speak. Excellent, excellent spoken professor. And some of the things that he was bringing out, and it wraps everything kind of up in the simple terminology that I always talk about, especially from the Federalist perspective, is that just as Madison and John Adams and many others had determined, is that our Constitution is for a moral and virtuous people. And one of the things that this professor, who I believe teaches ethics law and constitutional law, the one thing that he brought out very clearly is that when it comes to the judges, it is a moral determination within their oath of office. And even one of the local jurisdictions here in Ohio that he sometimes sit as a judge for has a very specific language into what that means under the sovereignty of God, which is in a municipality, uses that component in their municipal judge position, is not just so help me God, but also takes and brings it to that whole idea of the penalty under the sovereignty of God. Well, that's what we're missing. You see, that's what is not understood within the moral code and context by which Madison was looking at, and as this judge also, or he wasn't a judge, this law professor brings out, is the idea that the moral code of the Constitution is actually wrapped in covenant. I was so excited to hear that because, yes, I'm going to promo my next book. It should be out in March. But I start at covenant, ladies and gentlemen, and I bring that realization that what is it that gives us, even from that perspective of natural law, that then becomes extensible when we take and we bring law into a framework of operation known as a constitution. So ours is definitely a covenant. And he did an exceptional job of taking and really explaining well why it was that the Constitution, unlike the Articles of Confederation, went back out to the people and the states, but not the states in their legislative body, because they were constituted by the people. So the federal Constitution, for ratification purposes, had to go back out to the states. And the reason is because within the jealousies of the state legislators and all of that administration and functionality within the constituted states, you would have never gotten the Constitution passed because of having to give up certain elements of power and so on and so forth. So the simple explanation, which I thought was brilliantly articulated by this professor, was the fact that the people had to give assent through convention, each state's convention, to the national constitution for the very purposes and reality of fact that what? The state constitutions would also need to be changed. So while the people were in convention for the ratification of the national constitution, it also brought to bear that their state constitutions would also need to be changed to accommodate becoming part of the national constitution. That was brilliant. Did you know that? Were you aware that that was a very integral portion of the process? Wow. I thought that was phenomenal. I thought that was really exciting to hear him articulate that. And to the extent that what that means is that as we look at the balances of power, and we look at that it is always we the people that hold the power of governance, it comes then into what is that understanding of that power? What is that understanding of how governance should operate and function within the context of our constitutional republic? Ladies and gentlemen, what it really comes down to is, what does federalism mean? What is a republic, and how does that function? And what is it that we look at from all of the different aspects of who we are as a people, and also what were the needs of the nation at that original founding? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because I thought that this law professor articulated some things that I haven't covered before, and yet I think are very, very critical and important to understand as we look at to what is immigration, what is that difference, what does that mean in the whole effect of our constitutional republic this very day. So come on back in the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalists. They absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns, those Anti-Federalists. They got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you. And yes, this is Tom Navolis again, back with you. And as I always do in this segment, I really ask that you would take the time to explore the website, that you take the time to look at libertyworksradionetwork.com and see all the other valued programming that's on there, see what's happening during the rest of the week, and that you would, yes, that you would donate, that you would take and add to the value of what's going on with the programming. And I really want to encourage you to see what is happening. How are the other hosts and hostesses talking about your liberty, especially in those local markets that, excuse me, that you would get the opportunity to hear. I mean, look, you like that one? That's what they say on the media a lot of times now. I learned that from the Sean Hannity program. Now look, you see, we got to have fun here, you know, more than anything else. It gives us that opportunity to do that. So let's get back to that. Now look, you in the Maryland market, you got some real problems in Maryland. You know, Maryland was always a very interesting state, even during the time of our founders. And one of the things that I really want to draw back to in this conversation from the last segment was when I was talking about DACA, I was talking about illegals, I was mentioning about the law professor that spoke last evening, and the interesting aspects of what he had to say was not only in the context of how the ratification went to the people for those great purposes, that not only would it be accepting of the national constitution, but as well that the state constitutions would have to be changed. And the only agents, the only way that any functional government within the context of the United States can make any change is by what? By we the people. By you. By me. We are the only ones. We are, if you will, under the sovereignty of God, we are the sovereigns of our homes and the communities, the states, the country upon which we are blessed to be living within. Ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution could have never come about if the state conventions did not take and authorize it by the people. Okay? And I think that was something interesting in the arguments that I always bring up about Patrick Henry, is that, in some respects, he was a real statist. And he said, what is it that we're using the terminology, we the people? Where did we get that from? Because in that, instead of saying we the states, he was referring back to that whole element that the people are sovereign within their states. And to the extent that if you're going to take and layer on a national government upon the people, they better understand the depth upon which that means relative to changing their state constitutions, which was interesting as we look at immigration and bringing you back on that for full circle, because at that same time, it was no different than we have today. You know what? I don't know who they were, but I'm sure there were those that were equivalent to a Donald Trump in land and property speculation. There was a lot of that going on during and after the Revolutionary War, to the extent that here in Ohio, as this law professor wonderfully pointed out again, was that people went bankrupt because of the lack of influx of immigrants. Yes, America was always an immigrant nation, and for those purposes was to get the land settled. And, there were people that had financial, ideas about this as well. They wanted to, make some money on the land speculation that they were doing during that early period of the development of American history. But unfortunately, because of the wars in Europe again and all of the different conflicts that were going on there, the immigration capacity to immigrate early on was very, very low. It did pick up and increase during the 1800s, as we well know, and to the extent that this law professor said, we kind of had open borders. But here's the caveat as I take a sip of my coffee. Here's the caveat. The caveat being that people wanted to come to America to become Americans. They wanted to come to America to understand the rationale of our form of government. They wanted to participate. In other words, they wanted to be immersed in America. Now, did they maintain some of their national heritage background? Yeah. Let's see. Pennsylvania was a lot of German, Dutch. We had in New York was a lot of Dutch. You had all of these other types of nationalities, if you will, that were early on in America. What was it by? I don't know. I don't remember the story exactly. I didn't bother to look it up for this program. But it missed it by 1 or 2 votes that German is not the national language of America. I mean, come on, think about that type of stuff. I mean, those people go, "Oh, that's a wild story." No, it's a true story. And the reality is what a shift that would have made by a 1 or 2 vote margin. The problem that we have today, and the problem that, again, irritates me, is what is going on with immigration and that whole idea of what is happening with immigration in America right now, and that the fact is that we did in the 1920s or maybe a little earlier than that, late 1800s, we actually started to put some immigration law into effect. And we put that immigration law into effect because we were looking at what was happening externally, what was happening on a global basis, to see that there were potentially bad people out there. And not only that, we needed to look at what the numbers were and the value proposition of the different people coming into our country. Let's face it, no different than Australia. America was kind of like a dumping ground, if you will, for other nations. And so I think it's very interesting to see that it is kind of a dumping ground again for other nations, in that, we have this MS-13, we have all this criminal activity, we have all these other types of issues that are not related to people that want to be Americans. And as an article that I was reading earlier this morning clearly articulates, and I really like this particular individual, excuse me as I try and reference back to it in a moment here, but this particular individual, this writer, was talking about the idea of a guy by the name of Joe Pollock. He was talking about this whole thing with these DACA kids running around and, as I mentioned in the first segment, attacking our national foundation, invading the Capitol, taking and going into the elected officials' offices, and even the Democrats got a little slapped by them too, because old Chucky Schumer, he had them protesting outside his house. The component of the protest has always been radical. So as this professor was talking about last night, that, communism, in the whole evil empire aspect of communism, may not be there, which I think it still is, but the whole idea of neo-Marxism is absolutely there. So what we have in this whole idea of a globalist one world society is still the very thumbprint, that thumbprint of Marxism, of neo-Marxism, of all the other derivatives and terminology of what that all means, and socialism and this and that. It is absolutely and totally contrarian to what we are as a republic. I know I'm slipping in time and I'm not getting to Madison very well, but as a republic in the operations of federalism, these people do not understand it because it has not been taught and educated in the core concepts of our school, even though these young people have been going through a educational system. The majority are illiterate and they're radicalized. They're radicalized in this neo-Marxist activities, which is what we see. We see it on the news. We see it, what's happening. So let's call it what it is. And I think, no, I take it more than that. I believe that, and yes, this is the Federalist Papers, that Madison and the others would very, very clearly look at it and say, no, we don't want the radicals in America. We want people that will assimilate, become American, and do, even with Donald Trump said, love America. Love our form of ideas for liberty. And here's what's most important. Self-governance. Self-governance. It's not about the generalized government. It is absolutely not about the generalized government. And, that's what Madison starts talking about and actually delves into very, very well, both in 38 and especially in 39, in talking about that it is not a government that is supposed to be at all. It is not a government that takes and is supposed to be all-consuming over you. So I call this, and I don't know that I'm going to get to the exact specific words, but look, I'll put in here the reference for you of Federalist 38, and 39, because I think they're absolutely critical for you to read to understand that, what we hear in the media about democracy is what I call a Faux democracy. A Faux. F-A-U-X. A Faux democracy. That means it's an imitation. It's something that's made up, something that in effect is absolutely fake. Absolutely fake. So with a Faux democracy, you can have Faux news, fake news. I put up a blog yesterday on the SamuelAdamsReturns.net is where the archives are for the radio program, and I'm going to be using that blog and intermixing actual blog with the rest of the programming as well on there. I'm sick and tired of all the media, including Fox, including a lot of those, especially the ones that have to be on video, if you will. The point is, and I'm doing a little bit of it today, and not constructively on purpose, but a little bit I'm doing today, is that media is driven by emotionalism. And what I'm not doing today is they're driven by what? Advertising dollars. So you wouldn't have any of that programming on there unless they could get a listenership on the radio, or if they had a viewing audience on the TV that was somehow paying the bills. So these folks could make millions of dollars, which I don't have a problem with them making money because of the advertising dollars. So let's look at it from that economic perspective. But when we take and we drive to a Faux democracy, that's what we're going to pick up in the next segment and talk about. Because from the points of view of democracy, yeah, that makes sense at a local level. But you know what? The national government, the federal government, is not a democracy. And anybody that says that and uses that is fooling you and lying to you. I know you here on Liberty Works Radio Network clearly understand that, but maybe someday somebody's going to click on a YouTube video that has me talking about this. So when we come to the end of this segment, it's very, very clear that we understand that, you know what? We have a lot of work to do. And I'm going to challenge you right now to the fact that you need to do that and come back in the next segment to understand more of what that is as we look at what's going on here on Liberty Works Radio Network and Samuel Adams returns so that liberty can work for you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where, yes, it does. Liberty works for you. And as much as I always say the anti-federalists got it right, I need to qualify that for you again in this segment, because I am going to be quoting again from the Federalist Papers. The anti-federalists got it right from this perspective. They were predictive, and they were predictive in what could happen within the context of this Constitution, to the extent that if we did not have a moral and virtuous people, and if people followed through on even those warnings which Madison and Hamilton and Jay talked about in the Federalist Papers, the expectation would be that designing men and women, people of cabal, people of other instances, would take and bring us to a point of tyranny, despotism, usurpation, all of those other technical terms that say the people get dumped on. The people are stolen from. The people are now under the hand of government more than under the hand of God and self-governance. Okay? And what I always say about that, and I want to qualify it once again to make sure that I'm clear about it, and occasionally I'm going to do this, is that what I want to make absolutely certain is that the Federalists, Madison in particular, Hamilton absolutely as well because of his belief system, and Jay to an extent, really believed that the churches were going to do their job. Really believed that pastors were going to continue in that solid biblical teaching of what it meant to have self-governance and what it meant to have morality individually, such then we would have a moral society, and not meaning a faux or fake morality, not meaning the humanism of morality. No, it meant a biblical morality by which we could then have liberty. As Jesus said, he is come to set people free, so it is liberty in Christ is the only way that you can only know true liberty. I mean, there's common grace, there's the laws of nature, that's all true. But I'm talking about true absolute liberty, which also means the liberty from sin for that eternal perspective. But in that meaning, it means then you have a sense of morality upon which you self-govern. And in self-governing, it becomes extensible into everything else you do, be it family, be it business, be it government. Okay? Our government is not there. So the anti-federalists, they got it right because it's become corrupted because of the immorality that has gone through every aspect of government, from the school board to the corporate board to that which is at the state level, as well as we know, especially in the federal level, and in the judiciary. So that whole aspect of morality that I talked about in the first segment, that the law professor said that judges need to have that moral position. And actually he quoted from Justice Marshall, which was a quote that I kind of always put aside in reading Mayberry Madison, but he brought in there that it was the moral duty of a justice to take and pay attention to his oath to the Constitution, thereby ensuring that the Constitution is justly looked at and interpreted by original intent, and you can only do that if you're a moral individual. So that was very, very interesting. But back to this faux democracy that I was talking about in the last segment. The faux democracy, or the fake democracy that we're seeing today, and we see on the generalized mainstream media, and we see in many other educational formats, and we see these illegals running around and saying democracy this, democracy that. And well, number one, we're not a democracy at that national level. And I want to take something real quick out of here, and it's right out of, let's see, the Federalist 39, what Madison was talking about, and when he was looking at what is government, how are we looking at it from that form of republic and small r, republicanism, and then what does it mean in the context of federalism, in that relationship of the people to the state, to the federal government to the people, the federal government to the state. You know, how does that matrix work in all of that? He is saying that in the latter, he's talking about local authorities. Let me really go up here. The idea of a national government involves in it not only an authority over the individual citizens, but an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things, so far as they are objects of lawful government. Lawful government. Among a people consolidated into one nation, this supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature. Among communities united for particular purposes, it is vested partly in the general and partly in the municipal legislatures. Okay, you got that? We're talking about getting down into the municipal. Okay? In the former case, all local authorities are subordinate to the supreme and may be controlled, directed, or abolished by its pleasure. In the latter, the local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy, no more subject within their respective spheres to the general authority than the general authority is subject to them within its own sphere. That sounds like a lot to digest, and that's why you have to read that. Basically, it's like, here's the separation. It's all about limited government, and it all comes down to the people. He continues in this clarifying, is that in this relation, then, the proposed government cannot be deemed a national one, since its jurisdiction extends to certain enumerated objects only, and leaves to the several states a residuary and inviolable sovereignty over all other objects. It is true that in controversies relating to the boundary between the two jurisdictions, the tribunal which is ultimately to decide is to be established under the general government. But this does not change the principle of the case. The point in this is that when we have, especially illegals, running around and appealing to the national government, well, that's fine and dandy, but first off, again, they're illegal, they're not citizens, so they have no jurisdiction. Whereas you and me, as citizens, not only of the federal government, these are the United States, and there's, I'm not getting into all the other issues around those statements, but we are also citizens of our state and members of our communities. So with that, Madison is very clear. The federal government is always supposed to be limited. Okay? Limited. And it's according to certain enumerated objects. So what we have is what I talk about in my book, and what I talk about on this program is we've had the perversion of that enumerated power. We have seen that through court action. We've seen that through legislation. We've seen that through executive action, usurpation. in so many different ways. So what we have to do is we have to talk about how do we start moving forward? How do we start taking and correcting that? Well, part of it is citizen participation. That is the first part, the most important part. And this goes back to my opening to my pastors and all in general, is that from the moral perspective, which I'm not going to go, and it's in 38 talking about more of republicanism and federalism, is that to have that moral component of self-governance and participating in the government upon which you are living in. So I'm going to say this to all you church folks out there, all you Christian folks. If you are not participating in this earthly government, then you might as well go check out somewhere else. If you're not going to participate in the government of the United States of America from the moral, biblical perspective that you have, and you allow evil to persist, it's on you. And you might as well then go ahead and pack up and be a missionary and go to some other country where all the Christians that are under evil and don't know how, they don't have a form of government to stop evil, go there, help them. Go do that. Maybe that's your calling. But if you're a Christian of a biblical Reformation perspective, then it is your duty to participate. Don't use Romans as an excuse as not participating, because it was designed, not that America's greater or something else, super duper compared to any other country in the world and has this special eye in God's perspective. No. The perspective is that we have been given through His wisdom and divine providence a form and framework of governance by which morality can rule. Okay? The interesting pastor colleague or friend or an acquaintance, whatever term he wants to call it, and all of the various readings that I've done on philosophy and all of that, is that every government is religious. Every government is religious. So that means every family government is religious. Every local government is religious. Everyone has some form of religion. You have to. You have some form of faith, even if you don't believe in anything above yourself. So if you believe in yourself, and this is all components of what was argued by the founders, even if you only believe in yourself, which is humanism, then you have a religion. So the national religion in America has gone to all of those other isms, if you will. But that's not what the founders intended. That's not what the framers intended. They intended a moral and virtuous people by which then you have the capacity to ensure good government. And as it was brought out last night as well, is that in between the state governments, in between the federal government, was natural law. So we need to understand that again in the whole course of liberty around that. But that's a greater discussion. So what do you do? What do you do? Well, if you're a knucklehead like me, you make the attempt to talk to those pastoral elder leaders in your church, and if you can't get anywhere with them, then you dust off your feet and you go for a good sermon, but then you know that nothing else is going to happen. But now you must be involved in what's going on in your community. Don't give up, because you are that moral pillar that needs to be able to act within your community. Get involved at the school district. Start at the school district. We have to take our educational system back from the evil. Okay? Start there. And work in those areas to help develop citizen activity. Does that mean go back to a Tea Party? Does that a liberty group? Or maybe even into the Republican Party? I don't know what it's going to be for you, but you have to get, as I always say, your butt out of the seat and your feet on the street. We have to be people in motion, people in action, and people that understand. Go get educated. Pick up a copy. Go look online. They're there. Get a copy of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers and read through those. So I really encourage you to continue what you're doing and come on back next week when Samuel Adams returns, because those Anti-Federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right.